Anyone who overthinks for a living already knows this. The scariest thing is not being insulted. It is not messing something up. It is not even life suddenly punching you in the face. The scariest thing is when the outside event is already over, but the drama inside your head is still running new episodes. Something somebody said in the afternoon comes back at midnight for a second hearing. A decision you already made gets retried in your mind 8 more times. Nobody is actually watching you that closely, but inside your head, you build a courtroom anyway. You are the judge, the prosecutor, the defendant, and by the end of it, you also find a way to sentence yourself. That state is obviously common today. Sometimes it looks like procrastination. Sometimes it looks like self-doubt. Sometimes it looks like moral perfectionism. Sometimes it looks like being too self-aware for your own good. You analyze better than other people, you notice more, you reflect more. But the problem is that the more clearly you see, the less able you are to move. The more you understand, the worse you seem to live. At first you think the issue is that you are too rational. Then, eventually, you realize it is not rationality at all. You are trapped by consciousness itself. And Dostoevsky saw this more than a century ago. He saw it with such brutality that when you read Notes from Underground today, you almost want to ask whether this man had secretly been scrolling the internet in some alternate timeline. How did he write modern mental spiraling so early, so accurately, and with so little mercy? Welcome to my channel. This is To the Lighthouse. In this video, I want to start with Notes from Underground, a short novel with an absurdly long aftertaste, and then move through Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, and Ivan in The Brothers Karamazov. What exactly was the modern sickness that Dostoevsky put on the page? What is it? Why does it appear? And how does it slowly drag a person down into the underground of the mind? If you are interested in literature, intellectual history, modern psychological struggle, or simply that very human condition of thinking yourself into pain, stay with me. Because by the end, I want to suggest something a little unsettling. A great deal of modern suffering does not come only from noise, pressure, or chaos. It comes from the fact that freedom and consciousness themselves have become burdens. Underground. So first, what exactly is Notes from Underground? Dostoevsky published it in 1864, and it became one of the key works of his middle and later period. It is not a long book, but its place in literary history is enormous. People often treat it as one of the early sources of the modern psychological novel, existentialist literature, and even the anti-hero tradition. Its main character does not even get a proper memorable name. We usually just call him the Underground Man. That is already a brilliant choice. He is not an aristocratic hero, not a suffering saint, not one of those protagonists who clearly exists to do grand things. He is a retired minor civil servant in St. Petersburg. He is 40, poor, hypersensitive, awkward, resentful, and painfully self-aware. The novel has 2 parts. The first is basically one long monologue. He lays himself on the table as if he were presenting his own psychiatric report and says, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man." Then he keeps digging. He exposes his jealousy, resentment, vanity, inferiority, and vindictiveness, as if he has decided that self-dissection is now a hobby. The second part gives us episodes from his life. He is humiliated by former classmates. He obsessively chases after a carriage in order to restore his dignity. He speaks to a young woman named Liza with what almost sounds like prophetic moral insight. And then, the moment genuine human closeness becomes possible, he turns around and humiliates her. What makes this book extraordinary is not plot in the conventional sense. It is that the underground man feels less like one person and more like a whole psychic structure. He is not simply bad, and he is not simply pitiable. The most frightening thing about him is that he has too much consciousness. One of the most famous ideas in the book is that excessive consciousness is a disease. That line still hits hard today. Under normal circumstances, people assume that more reflection is good, more clarity is a virtue, more self-awareness is better than drifting through life half asleep. But the underground man says, not necessarily. If a person becomes so conscious that at every moment he sees himself, analyzes himself, doubts himself, and exposes his own motives, then eventually He may not even know how to take a step. Dostoevsky captures something very delicate here. The underground man does know what is decent, what is kind, what is socially normal. In fact, he knows it too well. That is why he is trapped before every action. An ordinary person gets insulted, and maybe gets angry, snaps back, or walks away. The underground man cannot do that. First, he analyzes why the insult happened. Then he wonders what reply would preserve his dignity. Then he worries that replying at all would make him look petty. Then he wonders if the other person cares in the slightest. Then he suspects that the whole drama exists only because he is performing it for himself. By the time he has gone one full circle, nothing has been done, but internally he has already exhausted himself. The first time I read Notes from Underground seriously, I remember thinking that Dostoevsky was terrifyingly good at writing self-hostility. The underground man does not simply hate other people. More deeply, he hates the version of himself that needs recognition from other people. He despises social rules while caring desperately about whether he has been seen, respected, or taken seriously. If I put that in less literary language, it is the classic modern condition of saying, "I really do not care," while caring with your entire nervous system. So what Notes from Underground gives us is not just an oddball. It gives us a prototype of modern personality. At the center of that prototype is overdeveloped self-consciousness, underdeveloped capacity for action, emotional complexity, and a stubborn pride that refuses to be reduced to a category. He would rather suffer than be classified. He would rather fail than become a machine that functions correctly. And that is where the underground man becomes genuinely dangerous, but also genuinely fascinating. The age. But then the question becomes obvious. Why did this character appear? Why did Dostoevsky, in the middle of the 19th century, write this particular kind of person? To answer that, we have to look at the historical world around him. Dostoevsky was one of the great Russian novelists of the 19th century, and he lived in a time of intense intellectual collision. Russia was absorbing an enormous amount of European modern thought, while still carrying the weight of autocracy, hierarchy, the legacy of serfdom, and enormous pressure for reform. The intellectual scene was full of debate. How should society be changed? How should a human being live? Could science explain everything? Could reason design happiness? Could institutions solve the problem of human life, if only they were arranged correctly? Many progressive thinkers of the time had immense faith in rationality. The basic idea was that if you design the rules properly, improve education, and align interests clearly enough, people will naturally move in a more reasonable and beneficial direction. You can think of it as a 19th century version of social engineering. In today's language, it is a bit like believing that if the algorithm is strong enough, the model comprehensive enough, and the platform intelligent enough, human beings can be smoothly managed, emotionally regulated, and conflict optimized into submission. Dostoevsky had deep suspicions about that. Notes from Underground is, among other things, a serious argument against rational optimism. Through the voice of the underground man, he insists that a human being is not a piano key, not a bead on an abacus, not a device that produces the correct output when pressed in the correct way. Human beings sometimes do things that are against their own interest on purpose. They reject happiness on purpose. They create trouble on purpose. They even destroy themselves on purpose, just to prove that they are not merely the outcome of a formula. This is where the image of the Crystal Palace becomes important. In 19th century Europe, industrial civilization became fascinated with symbols of transparency, order, reason, and progress. The Crystal Palace looked like a showroom for the future, a place where everything could be calculated, displayed, and managed. When the underground man confronts that ideal, he does not feel inspired. He feels irritated. He hates perfection that leaves no room for refusal. Because once everything has been designed into its correct form, can a person still say no? Can a person still make a mistake? Can a person still prove he is not a replaceable part by choosing irrationally, stubbornly, even destructively? That is one reason why Notes from Underground feels so modern. It already intuits something crucial. Modern society gives us more freedom, more explanatory frameworks, and more methods for improving ourselves. But that does not automatically make us happier. On the contrary, A world that teaches us to analyze ourselves more thoroughly may also create new forms of self-torment. Seen in the broader literary history of Europe, this becomes even more interesting. 19th-century novelists across the continent were all trying to understand how modern life shapes inward experience. Victor Hugo in Les Miserables shows how institutions crush the individual. Charles Dickens, in novel after novel, shows how industrial society produces cruelty and emotional coldness. Gustave Flaubert in Madame Bovary shows how desire, fantasy, and imitation destroy a life. But Dostoevsky goes inward with unusual ferocity. He does not only ask how society wounds people, he asks how a person can become the executioner inside his own mind. Overthought. So by now, we can say more precisely what the underground man's illness actually is. It is not simply depression. It is not ordinary sensitivity. It is a form of mental friction produced by excessive self-consciousness. And that friction operates on several levels. The first is compulsive replay. A glance from someone else, one casual sentence, one careless gesture can be taken home and re-examined 100 times. Beneath that lies imagined revenge and imagined compensation. In his head, he writes endless alternative scripts in which he finally wins, finally looks dignified, finally gets seen. Beneath that lies something even more corrosive. Morality and vanity become tangled together. The underground man does want to be good, he does, but he does not trust even his own goodness. He asks himself whether his kindness is genuine or just a performance of kindness. And once he starts asking that, sincerity itself collapses. That is why the scene with Liza is so painful. On the surface, he gives her this long speech full of pity, moral vision, and psychological insight. For a moment, it feels as if he has truly understood another wounded human being. But the instant Liza actually responds to that understanding, the instant she comes closer and treats him as if he meant what he said, he cannot bear it. Because what he really wanted was not relationship, and not redemption. What he wanted was the feeling of standing on moral high ground for one luminous moment. Once she approaches him as a real person, that performance becomes unsustainable. He cannot live up to the better self he briefly staged, so he pushes her away. That is painfully modern. A lot of modern overthinking does not come only from having been hurt. It also comes from becoming accustomed to using consciousness as a preemptive strike. Before a real relationship can even begin, analysis suffocates it. Before anything happens, the ending has already been predicted. Before another person can hurt you, your mind hurts you on their behalf. Before a possibility can unfold, your internal courtroom has already closed the case. So the underground man's problem is not simply cowardice and not merely social anxiety. His real problem is that he can see himself too clearly, and that kind of self-vision is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a curse. The more aware you become of your vanity, cowardice, jealousy, and theatricality, the harder it becomes to live naturally at all. This is where Dostoevsky had already written a strikingly contemporary question. Can a person remain capable of action while living inside intense self-awareness? Can a person keep loving, acting, and accepting consequences even after discovering that he is not pure, not noble, not especially lovable? The underground man cannot, and that is why he ends up underground. Blood logic. If the underground man thinks so much that he becomes unable to act, then in Crime and Punishment we meet the next variation. Raskolnikov is not paralyzed by thought. He takes thought, loads it like a weapon, and runs straight into action. Crime and Punishment was published in 1866 and remains one of Dostoevsky's best-known novels. Its protagonist, Raskolnikov, is a poor student in St. Petersburg, so poor that he is barely surviving. He lives on the edge of fever, hunger, humiliation, and injured pride. He develops a theory that humanity can be divided into ordinary people and extraordinary people. Ordinary people must obey the law. Extraordinary people, if they are pursuing a higher goal, may cross legal and moral boundaries. Napoleon, in his imagination, belongs to the second category. So Raskolnikov decides to test whether he himself is one of those people. Then he murders an old pawnbroker and, in the process, also kills an innocent woman who happens to witness the scene. If we reduce this novel to a simple story of crime followed by repentance, we miss its most terrifying dimension. What makes Raskolnikov so disturbing is that the structure of his mind before the murder feels like an upgraded and weaponized version of the underground man. He does not kill in a single burst of passion. He does not kill merely for money. He first constructs an entire architecture of justification in his head and then uses reality as a stamp of approval for his theory. He thinks he is carrying out a philosophical experiment. In reality, he is putting his own soul on the operating table. I have always thought that what makes Raskolnikov such a powerful character is not just the murder itself. It is the way he resembles a person who can always draft reasons for himself. Every transgression comes wrapped in grand logic, noble language, and a larger purpose. He is not first evil and then searching for excuses. He first refines the excuse until it sounds elevated enough, and then he actually uses it. That is where he connects back to the underground man. The underground man represents paralysis caused by excessive consciousness. Raskolnikov represents another modern illness, which is theoretical narcissism. He believes an idea can override conscience. He believes an abstract category can outweigh a concrete human life. But once the deed is done, he discovers something his theory did not account for. Theory is cold, but the nerves are hot. The body burns with fever. Dreams retaliate. Conscience does not go silent simply because the argument was elegantly constructed. So crime and punishment is not only about crime, and not only about punishment. It is about the way a person can slowly deceive himself inside his own thought, until he is standing at the edge of a cliff without realizing how he got there. And honestly, that structure still feels familiar. Many modern people are not unaware that they are harming themselves. The problem is that they become too skilled at explaining why they must keep going. The more complete the explanation, the deeper the fall. Ivan's trial. And then we arrive at Ivan, the character who pushes all of this one level higher, from personal pathology into the territory of faith, justice, and freedom itself. The Brothers Karamazov is Dostoevsky's great late masterpiece, and in many ways, it is the grand summary of his intellectual world. On the surface, it contains a murder case involving a father and his sons. But what it is really about is fatherhood and sonship, desire and responsibility, faith and doubt, freedom and obedience. Among the three brothers, Alyosha stands closer to faith, Dmitri to passion, and Ivan to the modern intellectual. He is brilliant, severe, logical, and profoundly skeptical. He does not merely fail to believe. He cannot accept a universe in which suffering is used to justify order. We did a much deeper reading of the Grand Inquisitor in an earlier video, so I am not going to unpack it line by line here, but I still have to include it today, because it is connected to everything we have been talking about. In the novel, Ivan tells a poem, which becomes the famous section known as the Grand Inquisitor. The premise is simple and astonishing. Christ returns to Earth and appears in Seville during the Spanish Inquisition, only to be immediately arrested by the Grand Inquisitor. At night, the Inquisitor delivers a long speech, and the basic argument is this: you gave human beings freedom, but you overestimated them. They cannot bear it. What people really want is for someone else to decide on their behalf. They want bread. They want miracle. They want order. They want a life in which responsibility can be handed over. Why does this passage still feel so powerful today? Because it is not only a religious question. It asks whether human beings are actually capable of carrying freedom. The underground man rejects any happiness that has been engineered for him because he refuses to become a formula. But Ivan sees the other side. He sees that most people do not necessarily want the burden of freedom. Freedom means choice. Choice means responsibility. Responsibility means you cannot always blame your suffering on someone else. Many people do not want freedom in that heavy sense. They want stability. They want to go on living, preferably with someone nearby who can tell them what is right. At this point, Dostoevsky's portrait of the modern sickness becomes strikingly complete. The underground man is imprisoned by self-consciousness. Raskolnikov is deceived by his own theory. Ivan is crushed by ultimate questions. He sees too clearly how unreasonable the world is, but he cannot accept the ready-made answers, so he ends up putting the world on trial, then God, then himself. This is also where Ivan always gets under my skin a little. His problem is not the kind of problem you can dismiss as clever posturing. He is not trying to show off. He is genuinely stuck on suffering as a fact. If a person can no longer believe with innocence and cannot find a new ground to stand on, then thought itself can become a prison. In that sense, Ivan and the underground man belong to the same lineage. The difference is that the underground man turns the knife against himself and against human intimacy, while Ivan turns the knife against the structure of the universe. Still below. So now we can return to the question we started with. Why say that Dostoevsky had already written the modern age of mental spiraling long before us? Because the figures he created had already performed, in advance, some of the central dramas of modern inward life. The underground man shows that excessive self-consciousness can grind action into dust. You understand everything, deconstruct everything, predict everything, and in the end you cannot move a single step. Raskolnikov shows that human beings can use ideas to issue themselves permits for transgression, turning abstract theory into a private exemption from moral reality. Ivan shows that when old faith collapses and new certainty has not yet been built, a person can be crushed by the very questions he raises. These are not the same person, obviously, but together they form a clear modern spiritual genealogy. The more conscious you become, the harder it can be to live. The freer you become, the easier it is to lose your balance. The more intensely you want to become yourself, the more likely you are to become trapped inside that self. So what Dostoevsky really saw in advance was not just anxiety, not just depression, not just doubt. He saw something structurally deeper. Modern people move the courtroom inside themselves. Once many external authorities begin to weaken, people do become freer, yes, but they also become much more likely to become their own judges. Every act of reflection can turn into an accusation. Every act of clarity can become an instrument of punishment. That is why reading Dostoevsky produces such a strange feeling. On one level you think, this is so intensely old Russia, St. Petersburg everywhere, gaslight everywhere. Poverty, religion, and suffering on every page. But on another level, the person living underground, the person who keeps turning life into a thought experiment, the person who cannot accept the available answers and therefore hovers at the edge of collapse, does not feel far away at all. A lot of people today just live in better renovated basements. The room is brighter, the vocabulary is larger. The tools of self-expression are more advanced. But that voice which keeps putting you on trial in the middle of the night has not disappeared. And if I had to give my own judgment, it would be this. Dostoevsky's greatness lies not only in his ability to write suffering, and not only in his ability to write ideas. It lies in the fact that he saw very early that one of the great human dangers is that consciousness can turn around and wound the person who possesses it. Human beings are not only oppressed by institutions, by poverty, or by the injuries inflicted by others. They can also build an invisible underground room inside themselves, and then move in permanently. That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. See you at the next lighthouse.